Welcome to the Skeptics track at DragonCon. And now, let's start the show.
Hello, welcome to the Skeptic track. We're so happy to have everybody here. Welcome Snopes.com, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dave Moss. I am a senior investigative researcher at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. I am here to interview my great friend Arturo Garcia from Snopes. You are all here because last night you were at rooftop karaoke and you heard him do Bust a Move, Young MC's Bust a Move, and then promote this panel. And so I want to thank you all for writing it down and coming down here for this event. For those of you who are not familiar with Snopes, it is what I think is the gold standard for fact checking on the internet. It's where I go when I find something in my social media feed and I'm like, this sounds a little too good to be true. And I'm especially stoked when I know that Arturo is the one who wrote it. And so I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions that I probably somewhat know the answer to already, and then we'll go and we'll get some audience questions.
Hello, everybody.
Anyways, so let's start, Arturo. Tell me how you got to where you are. Like, what's the backstory? What's the origin story of the truth seeker Arturo Garcia?
Very haphazardly. I was one of those kids who grew up liking to write, but never really having an outlet for it. And then I got into my student paper in high school, and that kind of set me on my way. I worked in student publications throughout my college career, graduated, and went on to work for a print newspaper, the Wichita Eagle. If anybody here is from Kansas.
Kansas? All right.
Nice. Later on, I wrote for the local NBC TV affiliate in San Diego, California. And like a lot of folks, it would have been around 2008, the job market wasn't very hot. And I kind of dropped out of the biz for a while. But again, like I think a lot of other folks, the internet provided a pathway for me to not just get published, but connect with people who were having the kind of conversations and asking the kind of questions that I wanted to see reflected in media. And for me, that was a site called racialicious.com, which explored popular culture from the lens of communities of color. And that adventure led me to write for The Raw Story, I spent about 4 years there. And then in late 2016, Snopes was going through a period where it was building up its news division to fight what was at time we were beginning to see the burgeoning expansion of what's popularly called fake news, also called junk news. But when it comes down to it, it's the latest wave of propaganda and disinformation, and that's how we ended up here.
Excellent, thank you. So, from your perspective, why is this work important? What would happen if we didn't have people like you in the world?
I'm going to object to the phrasing of people like me because fact checking used to be part and parcel with journalism 101, and I don't mean that as a knock. I mean that from experience, because a lot of times what you'll see is when news websites, when news operations scuttle their editorial staff, scuttle their copy editing staff in the name of quote unquote generating profit, that deteriorates news as a medium, as an industry. What I like about my job is that I actually have the resources to spend days or even weeks on a story contacting whoever I need to contact. Whereas for other outlets, you're asked to put out, 5 stories per day. Like you were back in the Hearst era. And that kind of news gathering, you lose stuff, you lose details. That will happen. And that damage can be exponentially increased through syndication, through aggregation. There's a story I want to get to that kind of exemplifies that. And so I think what I do is back to basic stuff. And the reason why that's getting lost isn't so much the fault of the talent, it's the fault of the economic forces that come in and try to, in their eyes, reverse engineer a solution to a perceived problem, and in the process, they cause more damage.
I see. So, like, as you noted, fake news isn't necessarily a new thing. We were talking about disinformation that goes way back. But I feel like that term has, entered my consciousness during the, late 2015, early 2016. Have things changed since then? I mean, is it just me perceiving it, or has things actually, explain to me how things have changed since 2016?
I think the TLDR version of that is weaponization. You have more websites out there that are explicitly devoted to the purpose of spreading smears. And some of them will do it under the form of satire. Some of them will do it just because they know there's an audience out there that will take it. And one thing that even in the not even 2 years I've been at Snopes that I've noticed is that the methods are expanding. It's not just blog posts anymore. Now it's just memes. And it's stuff that gets murkier and murkier and worse and worse. And I think that's an example of how people have misused the technology of the internet to advance a very old form of social damage.
Oh, cool. So take me through your process a bit. How do things land on your desk, and then what do you do when you get them?
We get a lot of stuff via reader submission. If we'll notice, any given day we'll get multiple people asking about a story. As many of you may know, we work with Facebook, and they also highlight, hey, there's a lot of searches for this story. That's how a lot of stuff gets done, and we're free to enterprise stories on our own as well. But if you're asking where it gets started, a lot of time is people are raising the flag for us, and we go from there.
And then what do you do when you've decided that this is something that you're gonna research and do the fact check on?
You look for the first source. You look for the first site that posted. If it's done in a story format, you look for the page on Facebook that posted the image, if it's one of those. Or in one case, you look for the Tumblr account that posted it. There was a story I did about. Hang on one second. The claim was that Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis disavowed the Confederacy, and that spread via Tumblr. And then what people did was they would screen cap it, and they would put it on Facebook, and it recirculated there. So you see two different platforms getting used. And people weren't even doing this one maliciously. They were doing it in an attempt to show, to denounce neo-Confederates and such. But those claims were full of holes themselves. And in this case, we, again, luckily enough with Snopes, you have enough of a name that people kind of want to talk to you for once. Sometimes. Sometimes they do not. And sometimes they just wholly get a hold of. For one story, I literally called or emailed 20 state housing-related agencies. And I caught a break just because I reached a professor at Indiana University who was into the subject. But that's the kind of, again, I have the time to do that. Uh-huh. Whereas at other publications, I really just wouldn't.
And what are the? I mean, I've seen some fact check sites decide to do various rankings of whether something's true or false. How do the delineations between the various types of false or unfounded work for you? Like, how do you determine when something is actually false and just unsubstantiated?
Well, unsubstantiated is unproven, and the proof kind of comes out in the pudding on that. Let me see if I can find. No, that one's true. I have.
Is it disappointing when you find things that are true?
No, there's some surprises actually. There's a.
Well, what's something that you were sure was going to be fake and turned out to be true?
Let's see. Here we go. In June, the president made a speech accusing Canadians of doctoring their shoes and smuggling them out of the U.S.
What do you mean doctoring their shoes?
He said, there's a story about, talking about people living in Canada, coming into the United States, and smuggling things back into Canada because the tariffs are so massive. The tariffs to get common items back into Canada are so high. Come on. So high that they have to smuggle them in. They buy shoes and wear them. They scuff them up to make them sound old or look old. No, we're treated horribly. And a quote. Now, at first, first glance, it seemed like, let's call it bombast. But come to find out, that was based not on a story, but on an op-ed. And by the way, please, please, please learn to delineate between an op-ed, an editorial, and a news story. That will make a lot of difference in your arguments online.
Do you want to just quickly do the quick 1, 2, 3? In case
Sure.
people don't know?
An editorial is done by a newspaper or publications board. An op-ed is a single person or 2 byline, 3 byline column. And it will say opinion or perspective or what have you. And a news story is a regular old byline. That's the front page stuff. Unless you're at a site that is devotedly about op-eds or hot takes or what have you. Well, it was based on a column in the New York Post from a woman who she didn't scuff the shoes, but she would pass off these shoes she would buy to her brother, who would go between Canada and the U.S. And yeah. I mean, the shoemaking industry still knocked the president for it, but it wasn't completely out of thin air for once.
So, to the dismay of children everywhere, tell me about the time you debunked Santa. It's the Skeptics track.
Now this ties back to the aggregation issue I mentioned earlier. December 2016, East Tennessee, the Knoxville News Sentinel publishes a column talking about a guy who worked as a department store Santa, or Santa in the community. And the story was that he received a call from a friend who worked at a local hospital. A family asked for him to go there because their 5-year-old boy was dying, and he wanted to see Santa. And the story goes that Santa went to the hospital and made his way into the hospital, and as he was there with the child, the boy died. And again, this started as an op-ed. But because Knoxville is part of the Gannett chain of newspapers, USA Today picked it up and ran it as a story. And then it got picked up by CNN. Then it got picked up by McClatchy newspapers. And it's going all over the place. Now you're wondering, what kind of grinchy bastard looks at this story? PG. What kind of skeptic looks at this story and wants to poke a hole in it? And I'm thinking, why is my kid with a stranger when he's having a potentially, and in fact, fatal medical episode? What are the rules for this hospital? Are the rules for this hospital different than they would be for other hospitals? So I called the columnist, who I'm not going to name. But he's one of those guys who's been there for like 20 years, a local institution. And he heard the story, he talked to the guy, but they couldn't confirm that it happened. I called literally every hospital in the Knoxville area, and either they wouldn't talk to me, or they said that this didn't happen at their shop. So a couple days after I started making these calls, the Sentinel published their own follow-up story. And I'll quote, "The News Sentinel cannot establish that Schmidt-Mattson's account is inaccurate, but more importantly, ongoing reporting cannot establish that it is accurate. Therefore, because the story does not meet the newspaper standards of verification, we are no longer standing by the veracity of Santa's account." And next thing I know, CNN is calling me. Why did you decide to ask about this? And I'm like, why didn't you decide to ask about this? And it's funny in a sad way, but again, it shows how, what was it, to paraphrase Mark Twain, how much faster a lie can spread than the truth? Again, because someone didn't gather the facts from the outset and put it out there. In this world of media we're in, where so many entities are connected and can just syndicate content willy-nilly, nobody followed up on this until it was too late. So we ended up being the final backstop.
I love stories like this. Can I share one of my own real quick?
Sure.
Okay, so we were both in San Diego as reporters, and the local nonprofit news organization Voice of San Diego had its own fact checker regular PolitiFact style thing, and I worked at a competing newspaper and liked to troll Voice of San Diego. And one day I picked up a Chinese restaurant menu that said this was Robin Leach's favorite Chinese restaurant. Robin Leach, formerly of Lifestyles of Life, of Lifestyles and Rich and Famous. And I said, no way that the guy from Lifestyles and Rich and Famous likes this Chinese restaurant. And they went, and I tweeted at him, like, you have to do this one, you have to do this one. And I wouldn't leave him alone. And they did it, and they called him up. And he said, I have no recollection of this Chinese restaurant. And they didn't rank it false. They were like, unsustained, like, we don't know, maybe mostly true, because he said, it could have been my favorite. I was so upset about that. I'm going to segue into a question here, rather than just, talk about it.
A comment and then a question?
Right. So what difference, what are there differences between how Snopes goes about fact checking and other sites like PolitiFact go about fact checking? Is it similar, the same, or different, or?
I try not to read a lot of PolitiFact, for the reason that when you're a writer, you don't read a lot of other writers in your genre. To me, it feels like a door I don't want to open too much. If anyone else has critiques on PolitiFact, I'm not going to stop you. But I can't feel that the process has to be that different, because at the end of the day, we're both again, like journalists should be and can be, given the appropriate resources. It's about producing the primary source and as much documentation or expert input as you possibly can.
Well, let's talk about, what are some of the high stakes? I'm just looking at your computer, so I'm trying to lead you up for it. What are some of the high stakes fact checks that you've done, that have been really important? Or I can go the other direction.
What's been the dumbest one?
What has been the weirdest, dumbest, lowest, stakes fact check that you've done?
I had to pay to watch Show Dogs.
It's a movie.
This is one that became important because the movie was criticized by what's called mommy blogs. And the complaint was that a couple of scenes were glorifying the grooming practice of child abuse because of the way that it showed the dogs being fondled at a competition or handled. I got my $10 back expensed. And it was one of those things where I read the original review and I quoted from it. And then I watched it, and there was stuff that was not mentioned in that review. And again, it's one of those things where context is key, and you want to watch for that with the outlets you're consuming, and we can get to that in a bit as well. I'm not going to recap this movie because I value all of our sanity, but the review didn't mention that everybody involved, every character involved in that scene was not happy about having to partake in this, for one. And then I called, the American Kennel Club. This, the way it was depicted in the movie doesn't happen in actual competitions. But again, the scenes ended up getting cut because there was enough of a complaint raised from these mommy blogs that they felt that to take action. Mm-hmm. And that certainly wasn't the first instance of studios being pressured by a reverse engineered outrage spin. just ask Marvel how that went.
Are there serial offenders with disinformation or... Everyone laughs and I don't get the joke. I'm just reading my questions here I wrote down.
They saw a look on my face. Oh, yes, there are. There's a lot of them, and we have a guide on the site that lists a lot of the recurring offenders of sites that spread fake news. I'll name one just because it was an especially egregious story. A site called Freedom Junction, JUNKSHUN.com, published a story calling Sergeant LaDavid Johnson, who was killed in Niger during an assault. They published a story calling him a deserter.
What?
Yeah.
The spelling of the website should have been the first clue.
You would think, right? And this is one of those sites that it's a part of a network of sites that are owned by the same person. That their take is that they're satirizing conservative arguments because they're putting them so over the top that they can't possibly be believed.
Oh boy.
Yeah. They pulled the story right after we started asking questions, and then they said that they were gonna donate the money they made off of that to a charity. And my colleague Bethania Palma did this story. Let's see. I'll quote from it. They said they're gonna. They said they were going to. Let's see. Look at the site. They said they were going to donate the proceeds to a site that was for military families. We contacted that site. They said they don't take donations. They link to other charities. And they also said that Freedom Junction hadn't contacted them. Yeah. So, let's see.
It's like some meta disinformation.
That's
there.
beyond doubling down. So Freedom Junction, they're also part of the last line of defense. That's one of their affiliates. And they do a lot on Facebook too. And a lot of it's like they had a story. California will now implement Arabic numbers. Yeah. And again, after that, we have a site. I don't want to name names, but then we're talking about sites that complain that the globalists are putting chemicals in your Diet Coke, and Taylor Swift promotes it. It's a real segment, by the way. I had to watch that. And they're filling us all with MK Ultra 2, man. And I don't know, he might be Bill Hicks, but I'm not gonna say one way or the other.
You're gonna make me cry. I'm sorry. This is like Sunday. I'm a little emotional, and the humor is so funny. This just sort of came to me. So I really hate when people use the term fake news because I feel like we've got two different definitions out in the world, and it's just kind of too confusing that people don't necessarily know what you're talking about. What is the preferred term that you use for garbage? I guess
Disinformation.
Disinformation.
I think that when it comes down to that's what we're talking about. I think fake news kind of soft pedals it. And if I'm catching what you're meaning, then other people just kind of cling to it as a way to say, well, I don't like that that's true, so I'm going to say it's fake.
Yeah. I mean, I've been called fake news. Have you been called fake news by someone? I certainly have. I mean, I'm guessing you have. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some disinformation self-defense. What can people do? What are some tips that people can do to make sure they're not repeating garbage, not believing it? What can people do?
First of all, if it's spelled JUNKSHUN, or like 911patriotinside.org, if you come across a story and even if it's, let's say, a bit exaggerated, and I think most of us have that sense pretty calibrated. Like this kind of sounds off. Look it up. When I was aggregating, our standard was two legitimate sources, and I'll go into legitimate in a second. To well-founded sources corroborating that story. I think that's a good building block. If you want to talk about legitimate, and I don't want to condescend, but I have to tell you that I have gotten emails saying, this site, Washington Post, said that Trump said this. And I think regardless of how you feel about the Post as an entity, a lot of this, we're not going to say all of their stuff, then the vast majority of their stuff is at least well-founded and well-constructed and sourced. And I think that issue goes back, even to an educational level. We don't, the kids younger than us, I think have a much more advanced sense of media literacy and media integration in their lives than we did at that stage because they have so much more available to them. At the same time, I still think we can do better going over how to read a news story and what to look for. And I think those are the basic tools that we could all use.
All right, so we're going to start queuing up for questions, or you're going to start queuing up for questions. I'm going to stay here. Awesome. We didn't talk about this in advance, so if you don't have a good answer for this, that's fine, because it's my bad. But do anonymous sources, the use of anonymous sources in other news stories complicate the fact-checking process if a claim is made to be fact by, an insider at whatever agency? Like, can you deal with that, or? Yeah,
and that's one of those that you have to go back to the outlet. And for every other story you see it there about the Clinton body bags. There was one I came across recently that said that preliminary sources from police told us that. No, I actually called the police and I talked to them and I identified their the person I talked to, and they debunked that or they denounced that. But I think again it's one thing for the Post or the New York Times to have an anonymous source. It's another when your site's idea of a byline is a character from Fight Club.
And you had also talked about earlier, and then we'll go to you. But you talked about how something from Tumblr, started the infamous information and then jumped over to Facebook. Are there particular social media, or social networks that are more susceptible to this than others?
I think we're at a point where we have to start wondering if they're actually just willing to go along at this point. Tumblr and Facebook, and this is just me on my own, I'm not going to purport to speak for Snopes on this, but Tumblr and Facebook and Twitter have not shown a concrete effort besides even working with us to shut down these outlets or to deplatform these outlets that are spreading this willy-nilly. And I worry because we rely on them so much where that's going to take us.
We'll start the questions now.
Great. I've encountered some people in my life who've been skeptical of Snopes as an entity. So what would you say is the most concise way, if you have someone who's doubting or thinks Snopes has its own agenda or is backed by, certain forces, let's say. So what is the most concise way, would you say, to explain Snopes as an entity to someone who's maybe not familiar and maybe help them understand that it is, that you guys do good quality work, basically?
We show the work. Go to any story on a website, you'll see a source listing, and those sources will be published. They will be, they will be listed. They'll be interviewed. Like I debunked the Breitbart story. Oops. I debunked the Breitbart story. They were accusing Middle Eastern immigrants of spreading disease out in East County, and in our town, because their proof of this was A, Starbucks is having a hiring fair. B, they got a hold of a study published at UC San Diego and posted what they said the data showed. Well, I actually talked to the scientist who published that study, and I showed him what Breitbart did. He's like, no, that's not what that is at all. And we laid out and we explained exactly the method in which they distorted the findings. So if they got a problem with me, fine. If they got a problem with the site, fine. But ask them if they looked at the source listings on our stories. And if they say they don't care, that tells you more than you need to know.
Great, thank you.
So you had mentioned a lot of this information is coming from rogue websites or memes or even things that are claiming to be satire. In journalism, there's an ethics code that they all kind of theoretically work under. What can be done to kind of expand that ethics code or get other avenues of this disinformation to be a little bit more scrupulous?
Because we're not covered by a union, right? Organizations have individual unions, but there's not like IATSE for journalists, let's put it that way. That can be tough. My hope is that groups like SPJ, the Society of Professional Journalists, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, of Black Journalists, the Asian American Journalists Association, my hope is that those groups become more vocal on behalf of the profession in denouncing these types of actors. There's no unified meaning, the rogue, the people who publish this kind of stuff aren't going to go to professional seminars and conferences because they know they'd get laughed out of the room at best. So it's a tough road to hoe, and I feel like us as journalists, the more vocal we become about that, and on top of the better we do at our own work, I think right now that's our path forward.
Hey, so I know you mentioned that you don't read PolitiFact or don't tend to.
Well, certainly not when I'm working on something.
Yeah. But just my question in general comes with certain sites like PolitiFact or that rank claims as true, mostly true, extremely false, pants on fire, stuff like that. Yeah. Do you think that those ranking systems can, in and of itself, be a form of disinformation? Because, in a way, anyone who's writing that is basing that on their own opinion, on their own filters, as opposed to just saying, hey, these are the things that are untrue, these are the things that are unfalse, but as opposed to judging the entire claim, if that makes sense.
In theory, the risk is there, but again, it comes down to what's on the page. If PolitiFact says something's pants on fire but doesn't have the sourcing for it, then yeah, there's an issue. But when I come across their work, in general, I find that they do source stuff. I haven't spotted. I haven't spotted on something on PolitiFact that I think is just outrageously out of context. So, looking at it story by story, I think you have to look at, again, we list our sources. I think PolitiFact does as well. So go through that, and if you find that they either completely blew the read on that, then maybe. But and I'm not saying yes. Are there filters? Is it come down to to interpretation? Yeah, but is it does the reading back it up? Should be the key question.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I have mixed feelings about things like the pants on fire or the Pinocchio or things like that, because it feels sometimes like it's going beyond saying something's true or false and into some sort of objective stuff. Although for me, I mean, I do want to know if the person being fact checked is going to double down on the lie, or is going to say, you did a great job, you've corrected me, I'm going to correct it, and if maybe those are two sort of different tiers of how to look at somebody during a fact check. I mean, I definitely think it's worse if somebody doubles down on a lie.
Right. Could you unpack that a little more?
So when I see like a pants on fire, like somebody being wrong, like some people are wrong in the world. Like I've been made mistakes, people make mistakes, and it's often a matter of how you handle the mistake. Like whether you were transparent about why you made the mistake or you correct the mistake. And I feel like there's a certain like nobility, and that's how you continue to build trust, by showing that you are fallible, versus somebody who doubles down. Now, but when you have something like pants on fire, sometimes when I see somebody I don't like get a pants on fire, I'm like, yes, which is a little bit more than they were false. You know what I mean? Maybe I'm not unpacking it very well.
No, I think that I can't knock it, because I think that's an in-house choice. Whatever they we don't do hella false. We just do false.
I guess what I'm saying, that's one of the things I really do appreciate about Snopes, is that it's false. It's not false and this guy's a jerk. I mean, it's false, and it's not saying false, this person is a dirty, filthy liar. That's just false. And I think that is one of the things that I respect about Snopes, and makes me feel like Snopes is very, very reliable in that regard. Just a compliment.
You said that you think that the students and young people are more able to consume news and separate fact from fiction. The studies that I've seen suggest that they can't actually do that, and they have problems separating sponsored content from actual facts. There's a value of the narrative over truth. So what are some of the things that we need to do to become more intelligent consumers of things that we see online and in print?
I feel like everybody in the newsroom has asked themselves this at some point or other. I think not to oversimplify it, but it starts with good old-fashioned critical thinking, and double check on your own accord. Again, and I hate to keep hammering this, but again, we list our sources. I'm pretty sure PolitiFact does as well. Most of the time, when you read a publication and they source something, they'll link to it. You can track that. Look up the International Fact-Checking Network. I think they have a list of accredited websites as well.
That's a real thing?
Yeah.
What is it again? International Fact Check.
Yep. And let me look that up right now.
I love the inclusion of sources. It's like, to me, I'm just sort of filling time here while you.
No, I got it. No, it's a real thing. It's through the Poynter Institute.
Yeah.
And I think Google has this thing now where if they will highlight if something seems iffy. But I think do in-depth reading. Do follow up on your own. I think I've come across stories that get spread just because people don't read past the headline, and that's not a knock necessarily. That's what these outlets are counting on you to do, to get that visceral reaction from the headline and pass it along based on that. Nowadays we call it clickbait, but headlines are always designed to entice the reader. This is just a more weaponized form of doing that. Keep reading, keep asking questions. That's where it starts. Point taken on the studies by youth and media, by the way. Thank you for that.
My question actually ties in very well with the last gentleman. I'm a middle school teacher.
Okay.
And I find that 12-year-olds are surprisingly inept at operating the internet. There was apparently a transition from the time that they were using computers to using their phones. And
that got lost in the mix?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So basically, I'm trying to see what suggestions you have for teaching middle school aged kids how to fact check, how to be good consumers of news. I mean, I'd like to just say, well, here's a list of reliable places to get your information from, and here's a list of unreliable sources. Washington Post to be over here, and obviously, Fox News over here. But, short of just telling them this good, this bad,
right?
What are some good strategies that we can use to teach the younger generation?
Have you done it together? Like, have you gone through and plumbed the story together? I mean, that could be fun. Do what we do for a day. Take a story, look up look up the source document, dig into that.
Should that be one that you know is false to begin with, so the kids can have the pleasure of finding that out?
I'm tempted to say Santa, but
They can't tell the difference between fact and opinion a lot of times in this day and age. A good lesson would be to do a hard sourced fact, an opinion, and a fake, and compare and contrast the three. Yep.
I mean, when we're teaching things at EFF, and not necessarily on this issue, we like to think about like, okay, there's this huge thing we want to teach, but like, what is the one takeaway that we can get people? So like, we're teaching people how to make like really strong passwords using a complicated system at our table that involves dice. But if people walk away just knowing not to use the same password over and over again, I feel great. And so I think for me, if I was one thing that'd be really easy to teach people, it'd be just don't use Wikipedia, but use the Wikipedia sources at the bottom. Like, simple tip that I find is particularly useful for people. Maybe I'm totally wrong.
no, I think I think these ladies up front had a good point. I think there's I would suggest doing a debunking project together. That way they know they can participate in the process with you, and you can kind of lead them along, and that way the tools get. It's not just this good, this bad. It's that they can see why it's bad and where it went wrong or where it started muddying up the water, and they can learn to find sources on their own. It's another form of research in the end.
Hello.
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 You keep mentioning that you cite your sources, and I think it could be easy to falsify sources. And more so, I guess I wonder, is there anything preventing Snopes from falling into the wrong hands? How can we continue to trust Snopes? If they sold out or something, how would we know? The ultimate skeptic question, I suppose.
If we sold out. Not that I don't make enough Soros bucks as it is. Could you unpack that just a bit more?
Okay. I offer you $50 gazillion to sell me Snopes and continue to report things as true and false, but I have an agenda. How do we know that Snopes will not take that deal?
What happens when the current owner dies?
Huh?
What happens when the current owner dies?
Then we go into Thunderdome and whoever.
I feel like this would be a difficult question to answer, just because you could say it for anybody. Right?
I think one of the advantages we have is that we're not part of like a chain. We're not living and dying as we speak on the whims of whatever the next quarterly report says. Are we in danger? Possibly, but everybody's in danger. Look around the industry. Look at the Denver Post. They were, they had new ownership cut in, and like a year later they were gutted. Look at LA Weekly. But those are venture capitalists. I don't think David Mickelson is a venture capitalist. Stay tuned is the best I can tell you.
I would also say that if somebody terrible came in and bought Snopes, I have a feeling Arturo would not stay on board, and if he was told not to do what he does and what he's passionate about.
Nope, say hello to ace reporter Tyler Durden.
But that's another thing is that I think that if you can't necessarily rely on the institutions themselves, you can often rely on the reporters, and there's a lot of turnover in the industry where a good reporter will move to one publication to another publication. And I think that I find it's useful to not just get to know the publication, but to actually mark when you read a good story and you're like, that is a solid reporting, be like, that is a name I want to see. When that person leaves Politico to go to the Washington Post, or they go to The Intercept, or they go to The Guardian, like, mark that and be like, that's somebody to keep following as they move along in their career. I mean, certainly, like Arturo, this is not his only job he's ever had in his life. He was great at the Raw Story, and he's great at the Snopes now.
But you should still verify.
Well, yeah.
Verify the sources to see if that's still true.
Their sources start changing, it's a clue that there's been a change at the head.
If Sarah Huckabee Sanders was returning my calls, I'll put up a little smoke signal.
So, for the folks in the back who couldn't hear up here, it was reiterated that one of the telltale signs of that sort of thing is if Snopes was to start changing its sources, start relying on less reliable sources, or not publishing the sources. That might be some sort of canary.
Great. So, hi. I do have kids. They're older now, 17 and 20.
Oh, can you just a little closer to the mic?
I'm sorry. All right. Better?
A little closer.
Better? Okay. So I have 2 kids, 17 and 20, so they're older now. My 17-year-old is a flat-out skeptic, all right? And craziness. Associates people are like, since she is so logical, if you're not, again, on your forum, so she runs into that a lot. And so how I've told my kids is that if you're reading a special interest piece or an opinion piece, you should feel emotional. But if you're reading a news story, you should not. And that appeal to the emotion argument is what I've always been too sensitive to. And is that a good way to figure out what's coming out as false or an opinion? Or not necessarily? Like a starting place.
I mean, I want to say that there are horrible things that happen in the world that are uncovered by people, and so sometimes when journalism overturns atrocities,
if it's a tragedy or something, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, even beyond tragedy, it's and I think if it's a case of, let's say, like remember City Hall back home a few years ago, where those council members were on the tape with lobbyists and all that, and the UT and our local paper won a Pulitzer for reporting on that. It's hard not to read that stuff and feel anger, feel sad that it's happening in your local communities. You know,
is it the Duke Cunningham stuff? Or,
no, this is Kind of National City.
Right.
But you know, the strip club lobbyists and all that.
It's a long story, another panel.
Yeah.
After 10.
But it's I get where you're going, but I can't get behind, you know, you can't not feeling emotion behind the news story. Look at how it's presented. Look at the way the story is constructed. If you find it's going for like super over the top language, and again, it's another telltale sign of dubious websites.
Like the use of adjectives. If the adjectives start getting like too wild instead of descriptive, does that make sense?
Right. And
okay.
Or when it's gratuitous or salacious, or and again, there's stories that are of stuff that is really bad that a journalist can delve into responsibly, and I think the good reporting will always do that. And if you feel an emotion out of that, I think that's the sign of the good reporting, not fake reporting.
So responsible use measures. Excellent. Thank you.
Nice glove.
Oh, you see my earlier work in comics? I guess the question for Arturo is, do you think that the mass media has kind of fallen down on its standard of truth for its reporting? I mean, not so much that they're telling lies, but that they're not calling out things that are, untrue or questionable on that?
I think what's happening is you're seeing a lot of journalists get their legs cut off. And again, I'll reiterate these examples I mentioned earlier. The Denver Post got taken over by new ownership, and began laying off staff all over the place. LA Weekly, one of the great weekly alternative news publications in Los Angeles, got taken over by new ownership, and that was a case where a venture capitalist cabal came in, completely torched the staff, and started publishing positive reviews of businesses that had business links to it.
Oh, they put one of the board members on the cover promoting him as like this hip hop savior without even disclosing that he had a relationship with the paper.
And I think that's a media problem, because that's a problem that's been foisted upon it. And like I said, with this, the aggregation stuff and the outlets that expect you to put up like 5-6 stories a day, where it's like a train engine, you've got to keep chugging the coal in to keep the train moving. But because that happens, the reporter working on that does not have the time to dig as deeply as they might want to or might even be able to.
Well, I'm not thinking so much, some of the finer points of it, but I'm kind of thinking back to the few of the news. It was what was it? The Bowling Green massacre incident there. Something that was very straightforward, easy to say that never happened. There was nothing, nothing in the news at all about any, mass shooting in Bowling Green by an immigrant or whatever. As opposed to, I can see certain, topics where it's like it's obscure or questionable. But,
no, we said it was false. No.
Oh no, I'm sure you guys did. But I'm thinking the mass media.
He's like fact checking himself before he talks.
Yeah. The newscasters and the people on the radio. That's
depending on which outlet we're talking about, I can see people kind of like dancing to that conclusion to guarantee viewership. Because again, they need people to tune in, especially when ad rates are falling all over the place. Are they falling down are they falling down on the job? I think they've been pushed into uncomfortable ways of pursuing it. And again, if it's an industry that depends on views, a lot of outlets are going to do whatever they have to do to get those views.
Hi. Seems to me that a lot of news outlets publish this stuff because people believe it. And I have a lot of very well-intentioned family and friends of family and that kind of thing that seem to believe a lot of articles that they read that don't hold up to even 5 minutes worth of Googling. What's the best way to help those people to understand the risks of lying on the internet without coming across as kind of being a douchebag to people that you really care about?
Are you near a bar? From engaging in a lot of these discussions with people, particularly around the time of the Ferguson uprising, I hate to tell you, but I don't think there's a way to avoid coming off like a jerk. I think you have to kind of first off take care of yourself and ask yourself how far you're willing to go with these folks. And I hate to be pessimistic, but there's some of these folks that just aren't gonna come around through prodding. I don't know what it's going to take yet, but my hope is that after, let's call it the fever of the times recedes a little, they can start making their way back. Do what you can. Don't let yourself get lost in that. And we'll hope for the best.
I mean, if I can add, I think that it's also important that to point out that this information has consequences on real people. Like people's lives are actually affected by it, right?
Oh yeah, relationship. These corrode relationships.
Yeah, but I mean a viral story that is about a person that is false can actually have a damage on the person who's the subject of it. And I think that one thing we've witnessed in our work is that people aren't necessarily always connecting real people to the things that they're doing on the internet. And that if people are able to make that connection, maybe they are more empathetic and they realize that there are consequences. It's not just you put trolling out or bullying into the net just because you don't see it having an impact on people, that it's not actually there.
Man, next thing you know, someone's taking a gun to a pizza parlor because they heard something on the internet.
Yeah.
I think if you can, like Dave said, I think it's a good idea. Highlight that people are getting hurt over this now.
Thank you.
Thank you. We got about 5 minutes left, but I think how far does the line back? I think we're like 3 or 4 people. 4 people? Yeah. So let's try to do it.
Well, good news. I have quick questions. So, disclaimer, I came in late, so if I'm asking a question that someone's already asked, forgive me, and my ignorance. But I did some research long ago because I became intrigued on the topic of fact-checking and stuff like that. And I was wondering, is it a law for news organizations to fact-check? Is it I was wondering, is it law, a law for them to do that? No, right? Because it infringes on their freedom of speech, right? On the rights of, so that was question number 1. Thank you for answering that. Simple head nod. Second question, can you give me some 2 or 3 organizations that are dedicated to fact-checking, like the International Fact-Checking Organization? Any other ones out there that are really, really good?
Snopes.
Snopes? Okay.
Easy one. You were late to the panel.
So
IFC is good.
Self-promotion.
A whole lot of work. Again, I've yet to hear anything stick against PolitiFact. I mean, I get the criticism of Pants on Fire, but I don't think I've heard reputable sources say that PolitiFact isn't legit. I would look up the Poynter Institute in general, because they have links to fact-checking groups not just in the States but around the world, and they can refer you to, if there's a story in Brazil that looks fishy, you can look up Brazilian fact-checking institutions, and they I did that for a story myself.
This isn't quite the same thing, but I think on the media, the radio show puts out these really nice guides to information after a major event, like a terrorist attack or a shooting, and how to filter your facts during an unreliable time where misinformation might be spread. And then they've got one for after a shooting, after an earthquake, that kind of thing. And I think those are I find those helpful. On the media, it's out of I think WNYC.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You guys are doing great work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. I was wondering your thoughts on how can we change the current trend for objective truth, science, and these legitimate news sources that you talked about being seen as liberal biased, and how can we get people out of their echo chambers when it comes to the information they're getting about the world? Because right now people are often loyal only to their political party's sort of news sources and are kind of unwilling to look past that and other sources, and they're getting widely different information about even just what's going on in the world. So wondering your thoughts on sort of how can we depoliticize truth?
That's it.
30 seconds.
Yeah. No, I think.
It says truth isn't true.
Right. Somebody should write a book. Like we were saying earlier with the other gentleman, I think if you can show the real world effects of being in that echo chamber, or how this is affecting people out there in the world, somebody got run over in Virginia because a bunch of fools, a bunch of people live too long in a particular sphere and refuse to come out of it. And keep pushing. I mean, there's if there was a simple fix, somebody would have found that already, but there's not. So I hate to give you the short version. All right, 1 minute 40 seconds.
We can do it. We can do it.
To your thinking, is there merit to drawing a distinction between news items that are untrue but misguided? I think of the story from a couple of years ago about Ann Coulter refusing to fly on a plane that was piloted by a black woman. Of course, that story was untrue, but it was a satire site, versus stories that are malicious in their falsity.
Oh yeah, satire is great.
Yeah. Is there a litmus test for that, or merit to even drawing that distinction, to your thinking?
This will be open to interpretation for a lot of folks, but I look at sites like Reductress, or the old classic The Onion, or The Hard Times if you're into music. That's satire. It's not demonizing people or peddling a stereotype for the sake of inflaming your readership. Again, like calling a black serviceman a deserter, or hinging a story on the use of Arabic numerals. Satire is funny. when it comes down to it. And a lot of these other sites, besides just smearing people wholesale, they're just not funny.
So I think we're out of time. Do we have room for one more, or are we good?
The last question.
One more question.
Just make it quick.
Oh my! Like, where's that voice coming from? Go for it.
I'm real good.
Comment on one of the previous questions about how to connect with somebody who doesn't see the world your way. Listen to them. Have them explain to you why their opinion is right, why something that you see that is obviously false to you is apparently true to them. You might find out something you didn't know, but they might prove themselves wrong in the process. You might not need to do any work.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think that having conversations, like maybe people are more willing to listen if they feel like they were heard, you know, and maybe you don't have to believe them, but get them engaging in a conversation. You're more confrontational on these sort of things. So.
If that conversation is about somebody doing harm to my communities or other communities, I think they can get a little dicey.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Okay, I think we're out of time. Arturo came here all the way from California. It's not a short flight. Give it up. Thank you, everyone, for coming out.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate it. And I'm so happy that Snopes came. I'm just so excited. Y'all clap some more. These guys are like, this is our core. This is a gold standard. Yes.